Welcome to Positive Vibes with Jan Boal, registered nurse and empowering guide.
Hey now, what's your story? Hey now, let's take a journey.
Hello and welcome to Positive Vibes. And I'm your hostess, Jan Boal, obviously. And I'm with Keith Carlson, who is a registered nurse who's done a variety of nursing skills backgrounds, but is pretty well known now for his Keith Nurse Show podcast. And so we have him on the show today. Welcome, Keith.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jan. And it's the Nurse Keith Show. That's right.
Yes. And I had the pleasure of meeting Keith a year ago at the NNBA, National Nurses Business Association, at the conference. And I had been interested in doing podcasts. And lo and behold, there he was standing there with his little booth. And I was like, this is it. This is who I want to meet. So I've had a pleasure of being able to get some coaching from Keith. And he's just wonderful. He's very helpful. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, how you can sign up with him. So Keith, you've been in nursing for how many decades?
Let's see, 24 years, yeah, since 1996.
And you've done nursing in a variety of ways, as in home health, hospice, supervisory positions.
Yeah, home health, hospice. I was a public health nurse for a town of 25,000 for a while. And I did a lot of community health and case management in the urban setting with vulnerable populations. And then my last actual job was as the chief nursing officer of a home health agency in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Wow, yeah. So then what turned your head to showbiz, so to speak?
You're so funny. Well, I fell into blogging back in 2005, and back when nobody really knew what they were doing anyway. And my blog slowly morphed into a nursing and healthcare blog because that's what people seemed to be interested in when I wrote about it. Mm-hmm. So it became really a nursing blog, and it was one of the first out there, actually, just by accident, not by any prescient sense of mine knowing what was cool. Right. I was just kind of checking it out. And from there came coaching, and then from there rose podcasting around 2011. And my partners and I launched one of the very first nursing podcasts on the internet called RNFM Radio in 2012. And again, I fell into it. It wasn't like I knew what to do. We just kind of did it. It just kind of happened. And it all rose from there into freelance writing and speaking on stage and things like that. So, you know, showbiz, whatever. I mean, I find that for some reason I have things to say and people want to hear them. So, you know, I can't argue with that.
And I love that RNFM.
Yeah.
You know, that was a great line, or station.
Yeah, and that went about 260 episodes, and my show spun off of that show kind of halfway through its life, and my show is now nearing 300.
That's great. That's great. What I like about what you do, Keith, is I kind of feel like you're a nurse that's out there helping other nurses in a variety of ways, whether it's just talking about support, you talk about things that can happen on a floor, how to have better communication, different other problem-solving techniques. Was that kind of your original intent? Or like you said, it kind of sounded like it first started off with about health issues.
Yeah, it started out around healthy living for nurses. That's what I first started coaching about. But I noticed that people seemed more concerned with their careers, and they were clamoring for help with their careers. So I sort of turned myself into a career coach, because there is no school for career coaching. Mm-hmm. Really. And I followed in the footsteps of Donna Cardillo, who was one of my mentors. And I just kind of cut my teeth working with people and figuring out what their problems were by watching the internet, watching what people were asking, watching what people were talking about on Facebook and LinkedIn groups and blogs. And, this was before the days of podcasts, really. And I just kind of got a sense of the zeitgeist out there. And I had things to say, and I wasn't afraid to let my opinions be known. And for some reason, people took to the advice that I had to give. So I've continued to hone what my message is. It's always about nurses having the best possible lives they can and the best possible careers. So my coaching spans from, resumes and cover letters and LinkedIn and all that kind of like nuts and bolts, but anybody can help you do a resume, really, in the end. But a really good resume doesn't do you much if you can't walk into an interview with your head held high, if you don't know who you are, and if you don't know what really makes you tick. So I really like to dive deep with clients and also on my podcast and in my writing, because nurses need to come from the deep, deep inside. And if you're not clear about your personal values and your mission, it doesn't necessarily bode well for a career, because you're just bouncing around doing things without feeling like you're doing what really speaks to you, your heart, your soul, your brain, your mind, what you really want to accomplish in the world.
Right, right. You got to be working your joy. And I think in the beginning, that wasn't even thought of or heard about. It was like, no, you're just a nurse and there you go. You're going to go onto these different floors. And then as the Western medicine world expanded, and then there's all these specialties and the intensities of illnesses, these nurses just became very, very educated and smart and talented and skilled in their specifics. And they can definitely hold their own in a lot of different situations.
That's true. And that's part of the professionalization of nursing, where, in the bad old days, let's say the first half of the 20th century and before, nurses were seen as the handmaidens to doctors, right? And I think as the social movement started to happen in the 60s and the 70s, second wave and third wave feminism, and now fourth wave feminism, et cetera, women have, grabbed hold of that and risen into positions of power within healthcare systems and in politics, et cetera. And we're seeing more of that. And, men are 10% of the population of nurses. And in 96, we were about 5%. So the growth is slow. So it's still, quote unquote, a woman's profession, but we've gone from being handmaidens we were called pink collar workers for a while, teachers and nurses, pink collar, which is very derogatory, and nurses have become more professionalized. We're scientists and researchers and highly skilled clinicians. And now we can get doctorates, and we can actually practice autonomously in half the states of the United States. So nurses have become professionalized, and that gives us more of a voice and more credibility. And I think a lot of nurses have seized the day. And I think that's really, really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think so too. The more that I've gotten involved in, nurse entrepreneurship and just hearing so many other nurses' stories and what they're doing or where they want to go and being their own boss and being advocates or whatever, it's very, very empowering. When I think about, where we started from and where we've gone, I think also what nursing has brought a lot to the medical field, in that I think we look at things more holistically,
Mm-hmm.
and I think doctors were probably more just about disease oriented. So I think our healthcare system has definitely improved because of that whole holistic wrap that we do around our patients. I mean, now, we study about cultures and all these other different layers that people just don't think about, but we interact with so many different types of people and of ages and situations that, it's no wonder we're the most trusted.
That's right. 18, 19 years in a row, right? In the Gallup.
Right.
I mean, nursing does have a holistic basis. And I think Florence Nightingale started it all, really. We can go back to good old Florence, of, she was looking at sanitation and hygiene and cleanliness and fresh air, and people, the doctors didn't really understand where she was coming from, but she even founded the science of biostatistics. So
Yeah.
it all stems from there, and we've had to claw our way into more autonomy and more empowerment as
Mm.
as clinicians in our own right. And to give the doctors their due, functional medicine and other forms of medicine that are considered not mainstream, but they're part of allopathy, they're coming to the foreground more. And I speak to more and more and hear about more and more medical students and medical residents who look at the world a little bit differently. And I'm actually incredibly encouraged by the millennial generation who are
Right.
coming into their own as physicians.
Yes.
And I think that generation of nurses and physicians just have grown up in a different world and a different paradigm. And I really actually feel quite hopeful and optimistic for healthcare in general in their hands.
Yes, because that whole doctor nurse role has really, changed, and in doctors knowing how much they really do count on the nurses and how they treat them, and there becomes more of a collaborating partnership with
Mhm.
each floor that they're working on. What have you seen with men being in the nursing field? What sort of flavor is it a little different, you think?
Well, when I talk to men these days, and I've interviewed some for articles and things I've done, I don't hear them talking about the experiences that I and some of my colleagues had back in the late 90s,
Mhm.
where we would go into a room with a older male patient, and he'd be like, "What, you're not smart enough to be, weren't smart enough to be a doctor, so you went to nursing?" I mean, you might hear that once in a while, but very recently I was writing a interview for Working Nurse magazine of Southern California. I've been writing for them for a long time. And I do interviews with nurses from SoCal. And I was interviewing this fascinating man who was a football player, very famous college football player, and he was on his way to the NFL. But after some injuries and also some head injuries, he decided he wanted to do something different. And he chose to cut his football career short and go into nursing. And
Wow.
doing this interview with him, I asked him, what did your fellow players say? And this guy was about 24, 25 when he went into nursing. And I said, what did they have to say? All the other players. And he said, oh, they were like, man, that's really dope. I wish I could do that. That's amazing. You're incredible. And they were encouraging and felt that he was doing something incredibly wonderful with his life. And he said
Oh,
all he heard was positives from all these big burly football player guys saying they wish they could
oh,
be him. So I'm hearing a little different music around men in nursing these days.
mhm.
And I think even though we're only 10%, when I talk about being a nurse, it feels different now than it did 25 years ago.
Oh,
I
I bet so.
think
I
the
bet so.
acceptance is much deeper and much wider in society in general.
Mhm.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say though is that, like, remember Meet the Parents, that movie, and Meet the
Uh-huh.
Fockers, with
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that they make fun of Ben Stiller's character because he's a male nurse.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the last vestiges of that old-fashioned view of men, going
Right.
into nursing because they're not smart enough or they're too feminine. So I think
Right.
that's dying off. I'll
Yeah.
shut up now.
No, yeah, and it's true. I mean, it's the one time I could say in the one field where men got a feeling of what it's like to be a woman trying out, to try to get into other forms of work skill.
That's
Because,
true. Yeah.
it's like, no, you're a girl, you can't do this sort of stuff. And, what's the matter with you? And blah, blah, blah. And,
Yeah.
having
Men can't
babies
be,
isn't good enough for you.
yeah, men can't be compassionate. Men can't be sensitive. The
Right.
the one issue that I've heard from female nurses and some male nurses as well is that even though we're 10% of the population of nurses, men in this is a massive generalization. But what I hear out there is that men find it easier to rise into positions of power and authority within nursing, even though they're such a small minority. And some studies have shown that men in nursing earn more than their female counterparts with the same experience and the same education. So, you know,
Mhm.
um, those issues are still there. And,
Right.
you know, we need parity on every level. And men do have an advantage there. And
Right.
I'm a white man, and I was raised into a CNO position, you know, and a woman could have gotten that position. So I don't, not saying I'm part of the problem, but it's a symptom of something that still needs attention paid to it.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen that at the hospitals I've worked at where, well, one, I think the men are more interested in doing that and not doing as much bedside for very long. And so I think part of that is a natural progression and they like being challenged as far as some of the male nurses that I've met and that I've had gotten up higher positions. I know when I was in nursing school, a lot of the guys were really fixed on anesthesiology
Mhm.
because of the machine, you know, and
Exactly.
so many of them go into the emergency department.
Yes.
You know, it's a quick get them in, get them out.
Mhm.
But with everything, there does need to be a balance. And I
Sure.
mean, as I think men have helped added probably some extra clout and some pull for us by being in this female dominated position, this
Mhm.
skill set. And you know, it's good, but it's still, I remember other nurses saying, yeah, the ED doesn't feel or work the same like it used to when there wasn't any men. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's just, you know, we expect the same thing for ourselves. I'm, yeah, willing to bet that any ED I've gone into, it always comes across as a well-oiled machine, whether
Yeah.
it's, you know, male or female or whatever. It's a good working unit. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fascinating changes that have been subtly happening in healthcare and within the nursing profession. And it's really interesting to watch. Just from, for me, it's sort of like as almost from a sociological point of view, I like watching it and just
Mhm.
observing how things are changing. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very good thing because I mean, you need yin and yang. You know, too much of one thing isn't a good thing. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm all for it. And in my nursing class, gosh, we probably had it was a class of 50, and I'm gonna say there was probably 10 men in there. And in
That's
my class, it was mostly older, you know, second career adults in that position. There was a few younger ones, but yeah, most of the men were looking at a second career. They
mhm.
needed to do something different, either because of health wise, or there was also the recession happened,
Oh,
and
sure.
that kind of motivated, yeah, motivated some of them. So yeah, it's just an interesting phenomena, and yeah, I'll have to find another male nurse to interview about what is he like about bedside nursing and coming from a male perspective. And because I've been in the hospital luckily only a couple times for, you know, little, like knee surgery and stuff like that, ACL. And I've had a couple male nurses and they were just as fantastic as the females. And I was really kind of pretty honored too, because these were guys that were close to my own age, and I thought it was really neat that they wanted to do bedside nursing,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, I love how much information you give other nurses and support. And you just have such a nice, calming way of when you talk. I love listening to you on your podcast. It's
Oh,
just
thank
like,
you.
it's kind of like being lulled into this nice conversation.
Oh, that's,
Um, do you have any favorite topics or any favorite stories from your podcast?
oh my gosh. Wow. Um, with just over 300 episodes now, including all my bonus episodes, there have been so many. since COVID broke out early in 2020, I've been doing COVID-19 updates. They were coming fast and furious at first because things were moving so quickly.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing monthly COVID updates because it's not that things have slowed down. It's just that the fire hose of information isn't quite as intense as it was back in March,
Right.
April, and May. So I leaned really heavily into COVID back when it first came out, and I took some controversial stances that some people didn't think, they thought were off base, that now seem to have come to fruition about various things that I
How about
felt
that?
important. And I've also really enjoyed recently, in this past, I'd say, in the last year or so, is broadening the depth and breadth of people who I interview. So I was focusing on nurses, and still it's a very nursing focused podcast, but I've been broadening the conversation. I had a fascinating doctor on recently, Dr. Jonathan Fisher. He's known as the Happy Heart MD, and he is a clinical cardiologist, very accomplished. He sees 2,000 to 3,000 patients a year. However, he is a mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction expert. And part of what we talked about on that episode was, we talked about the connection between the metaphorical heart, the energetic heart, and the physical heart. And it's a fascinating way that he looks at the heart from not just this kind of like mechanistic viewpoint. So I'm really enjoying bringing other people into the conversation. And just today, I did an interview for episode 297 with two women from a organization that my sister is on the board of in Northern Georgia. And it's a nonprofit, it's Christian based. And what they do is equine assisted psychotherapy. And they also use the harp and journaling as part of a retreat process for all sorts of different groups. And they're offering actually free retreats for frontline workers of the COVID-19 pandemic right now.
Yeah.
And they're called horseandharp.org. And they are medical professionals. One is a psychotherapist and one is coming from operations of the healthcare world. But I'm enjoying bringing in different voices doing really cool cutting edge things.
Right.
And I think there's so much innovation out there. And I want to encourage nurses to use a cliche, to think outside the box, to think about so many different ways they can use their skills and different options and alternatives for them throughout their careers, and how many cool people are out there doing really fantastic things. So I look at nursing as a lens, like it's a lens through which we look at the world. And if we can see that, that we can read literature, we can read biographies, we can learn about technology, we can learn about music. And I see nursing and the humanities as very, very
Right.
close to one another. So I think it's important to bring in all of those other aspects and viewpoints. And that's what I'm enjoying most about my show over these last, I'd say, 10 to 12 months.
Yeah, because it's still caring for a person's health,
Right.
I mean, my whole thing here with positive vibes is about mind, body, spirit, environment, and energy. And it's all a part of the chain. It's all a part of the health chain. It's who we are. Yeah, so talking about, thinking outside the box,
Mhm.
I always, I studied dance for years, and I wanted to be a dance therapist.
Mm.
And I would have had to kind of create my own master's program. And then I wound up getting married and having kids. Well, when I became a psychiatric nurse, I created my own dance therapy program.
Wow.
And it was wonderful. It was even more than I could have imagined as far as what I was expecting, my patients to get out of it. It was a hit. The class was always full. They would have had it every single day. And it was so heartwarming because, I knew it was going to help them, but to see it on their faces and how much they supported one another. So, I mean, we actually did dance moves and a dance warm up, which was right and left brain. And, and I had this one gentleman, and I mean, he looked just like a farmer. He kind of had a little, a middle there, and he always wore overalls.
Mhm.
And but his favorite thing was he loved ballet. He
Wow.
loved doing the bar work, and he
Wow.
loved doing turns, right? So you just never know. And so I introduced all different forms of dance and stuff. And they would clap for each other. We do stuff across the floor, and they all just said, man, we feel so much better after this class. And their anxiety was gone and their mood was up. And I loved watching how much they supported one another.
Oh, that sounds so
That was
fun and
just,
empowering and freeing for them.
yeah. Well, and the thing is too, it's like you guys can do this at home. It's
Right.
not going to cost you anything.
Right.
Just turn on the music or find something. And YouTube wasn't such a hit then, but still, it was a possibility of you could still dig around on the internet and find something. And
Mhm.
so yeah, doing that kind of stuff, so I had to become a psychiatric nurse to do what my original dream was. So you just
Well,
never know.
but that's great because that's what I'm trying to get across to nurses, that all of your many interests can actually come to bear on your career depending how you want to approach it. So if you're a nurse who's interested in writing, for instance, you can look at Teresa Brown, who writes for the New York Times, and she still works as a nurse, and she has incredible stories to tell, and her books are absolutely fantastic. She lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but she writes for the New York Times. She's incredibly well known, and she is a fantastic writer. And that's partially how she makes her living. And that's partially how I make my living, though I'm nothing compared to Teresa Brown. She is absolutely incredible. So I know I've met a nurse filmmaker who lives here in Santa Fe, my friend Camille Adair. I've met a nurse artist. I've met nurse attorneys. I've met nurse inventors. So whether you have a science mind or an arts mind or somewhere in between, there's really no limit except really truly your imagination and your willingness to take some risks.
Right, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I think you should try to see if you can interview Teresa for your show.
I did just a few months ago. She was
Oh,
on
did
my
you?
show. I think it was either August or September of 2020. She was on my show. Yeah.
And how was that for you?
It was great. She's a brilliant storyteller, and
Yeah.
she didn't want any talking points. She was just like, ask me questions and I'll answer them, and she's a brilliant person, and she's
Yeah.
incredibly warm, and
Mhm.
her intellect is so powerful, but she has a very, very powerful heart as well. So she has that beautiful balance between the heart and mind, and
Yeah.
she's a stellar human being.
And that's why I love doing Positive Vibes, the show, so much, because I love having conversation with people and all the different possibilities out there, and the
Mhm.
different avenues that people work in. And I just want to be able to share that with other people. And it totally, I'm kind of doing it for a selfish reason. Because I love it, and I love having these conversations with people,
Yeah.
and let's make the world a better place.
But you know what? That's actually not selfish when we do what we love and we
Right,
bring our, let's call it our art, right?
right,
If we bring our art to the world, whether it's the art of nursing, the art of podcasting, writing, caring, whatever it is, dancing, when we do that, you could say it's selfish because anything we do is self-serving because we're doing what we like. But
right,
if everybody did what they loved and brought the best of themselves to the world, and a lot of people do, then we're
right,
adding to the global conversation. And I think
right.
that's what being human is all about, really.
Right. It's expanding that great positive vibe, that energy. And it has amazing rippling effects, just like
It
you
does.
had no idea by just starting that one, happen chance of doing a radio show, and look at where it took you and all the lives that you've touched with it. And you just, yeah, we never know the rippling effects it's going to have. And that's what's awesome about nursing, is there's so many avenues.
That's true. And as a nurse, as a clinician, you might feel like, patients come through your life and then they pass through your life and you might not ever see them again. And that's mostly the norm for most nurses, largely anyway, unless we have long-term relationships or we work in a small community where we see people, oh, that person was my patient, or they recognize you. But for the most part, your patients are passing through your lives. But you never know one thing you did or one thing you said that might change the course of that person's life, just like people often say about teachers. Like, I have very specific memories of my first grade, second grade, and third grade teachers, especially. And there's little tiny moments, I don't remember much, but there's certain things they said or ways they were with me that are still with me to this day, and I'm 56 years old. So as a nurse, the smallest action, the one kind word could really do something for someone, and you have no idea of the ways in which you can positively affect someone with
Right.
very small amount of energy.
Right. You
Mhm.
just happen to be there at the right time,
Yeah,
saying the right thing.
yeah,
Well, and the other thing is this, it's kindness. If we're always coming from a place of kindness in the heart, it's going to touch a lot of lives in a lot of different ways.
you can't go wrong, can you?
All right. No, you can't.
Yeah.
But speaking of patience and being thankful, so in regards to that dance class that or the dance therapy program I'd set up, I still have the card, and I'll try not to choke up.
Oh,
But it was the sweetest card. And she just said, "Dear Nurse Jan, thank you so much for all you do and for teaching the class and for caring for us schizophrenics."
oh,
I know. It was just like, oh my gosh, yeah.
yeah. She
Yeah.
recognized that you
Mhm.
went above and beyond and created something beautiful for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty neat. See? But
Oh.
anyway, so you're doing blog. Are you still doing your blogging?
Yeah, I've had my same blogs for 15 years, since 2005,
Mm-hmm.
and I still have my podcast, and I write for a number of different organizations online, and I speak at conferences. This year has been odd because of the virus. I've done some virtual
Right.
speaking, which has been fun. In 2021, I think everyone's still watching to see what happens. So I don't
Yeah.
hear about a lot of in-person conferences being planned quite yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of the same. And I caught yours again. Well, I didn't get to catch your presentation last year. I only got to just meet you. I had
Yeah,
picked something else. And so I did do that session, and yeah, I really
right. The
enjoyed it.
power of podcasting for the
Right.
National Nurses and Business Association. Yeah, that's a fun course to teach. This is the first time I've taught it as a pre-recorded 3-hour course. It was a lot to record because I enjoy more being in front of people. So I generally teach that course for a half day at the NNBA as a pre-conference workshop. And it's fun because we're in the room together. So this was
Right.
it was a different animal, but the NNBA conference went wonderfully and people enjoyed the virtual format. So
Yeah.
there's some lemonade to make out of the lemons of the virus.
Right. And I thought that, considering, you know, having to be in front of a computer, they were smart in how they did it, and by
Mhm.
doing it, sections at a time. And I was impressed. I enjoyed it, and it was enough to where, okay, if you're going to be in front of a computer on a weekend,
Hmm.
um, just having that short amount of time, and then it was invigorating. It was exciting, the speakers and such. And I
Mhm.
have touched base with, actually this weekend I talked with one of the gals who I got to hear about with your presentation. So she and I got to talk a little bit this weekend too. So
Oh,
yeah,
good.
it's just nurses connecting with other nurses, and yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah.
Nurses are awesome. We have to say it.
I know. And we come in all sizes, shapes, and colors, and religions, and everything else. And that's one of the things that there's been a little bit of politics that have snuck in here and there on a nurse platform, on a
Mhm.
Facebook page. But we've
Mhm.
been pretty diligent about it's the one place where I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to know what your beliefs are, because I just want to like you as a nurse. I just want to just take it at that, and let's just be nurses together.
Yeah, that's great. And on my podcast, I've always been, I have been historically fairly neutral politically, though in the last year or so, I've definitely worn my politics more on my sleeve, because I feel like the stakes are so high right now. So
Right.
I'm being
And for healthcare.
more,
I mean, for
yeah,
for healthcare and for health insurance,
yeah.
absolutely.
So I'm being much more forthright about my beliefs. But my podcast is my bully pulpit, so that's where I can do it.
Right. That's right. It's your show. You can do whatever you want.
It's my soapbox, right? My megaphone.
Yeah. Well, Keith, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh, I just like to share that it's kind of like that old Dr. Seuss book that he wrote for adults. Oh, the places you'll go. I want nurses to walk in the world knowing that they don't have to fit into a box or a silo or a slot that someone tells them they're supposed to be in. So when someone tells you you should be doing something or should be a certain way, you generally need to walk in the other direction. And of course, sometimes people are right, and you know who's wise and who's kind of speaking from deep experience, and who's kind of imposing some belief on you. So
Right.
I want nurses to take the blinders off, keep their head on a swivel, as my friend Kevin Ross used to say, and
Mhm.
be aware of everything that's happening out in the world that you can be part of, and innovative things you can do. So I just encourage nurses just to embrace all parts of themselves and realize that they have the power really to do whatever they want.
Yeah, you don't have to stay working on a hospital floor for
Nope.
25 years,
No, you don't.
unless that's what you really love doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure, Keith.
Thank
So
you, man.
give us your big promotion, your advertisement about your show. Go ahead and tell me.
Sure. Yeah, the Nurse Keith Show. Well,
Mhm.
the Nurse Keith Show's been around quite some time. I'm breaking over 300 episodes now and bringing in lots of really cool guests, really, like I said, trying to diversify and still bring really good value to nurses about their careers. So I always keep the career stuff sprinkled in. I don't forget the original mission of the show. And
Right.
it's really a place for nurses and others also to come and just enjoy really good conversation. And then every fourth or fifth episode, just a diatribe for me. So it's one of the most fun things I do. I love, 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 love podcasting. And I just love being able to reach people all over the world. So
Yes.
you have a topic you want me to cover, or you know of somebody who you think you might want to see interviewed, just shoot me an email, go over to nursekeith.com and get in touch.
Okay. And what are some of the where can we find your show at?
Oh,
What-
well, you can find it at nursekeith.com. All the show notes are there under podcast in the menu at the top of the website.
Mhm.
You can also find it on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, pretty much every podcast app, Stitcher, all of those you'll find
Wow.
the show. And then I'm on Facebook as Nurse Keith Coaching, and Twitter as Nurse Keith, and Instagram as Nurse Keith Coaching. And you can find me on LinkedIn too. So I'm pretty easy to find.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, you're a man who wears many hats, and I think you're a blessing to other nurses. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Thanks, Jan. The
You're
feeling's
quite an
mutual.
inspiration.
The
So,
feeling's mutual.
all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to wish you all joy and abundance in all areas of your life. And until our next adventure together, be well, my friend.
More positive vibes at janboal.com.